Greetings one and all, I am Don151.
And I am Mekkah.
This is chapter 21 of my Fire Emblem 7 Hector Hard Mode 0% Gross playthrough. After the chaos that was Dragon's Gate, this chapter is a bit of a breather, and FE7 does this a lot where you have chaotic chapters interspersed among breather chapters. Although I guess if you're a casual player, this chapter really isn't as calm as it could be because of the fog of war. I definitely remember that on my first playthrough of this game, when I got to this chapter, I spent a lot of turns meandering about in the fog, not knowing where I was going, trying to find the boss to kill, and getting bogged down by all the enemies that have poison weapons that also take a lot of extra time to play the poison animations on your units at the beginning of every turn. But in LTCs, this chapter is very, very fast. And we started off with a couple of important events. We finally get to promote Canas and Fiora. Canas gains E-rank staves on promotion, which is really important because he needs to be able to use higher rank staffs later in the game, but we need to get him out of that E-rank hole first, and the only thing that he can use is heal. He has to use heal 15 times in order to get the D-rank staffs, where he can use a higher level staff in order to kind of like really quickly build up his staff rank a bit more. We promote Canas and Fiora in a bit of a staggered fashion. We promoted Canas and then we reset the game, restart a chapter, and then promoted Fiora. We're not going to reset the game after promoting Fiora and continuing on to the rest of the chapter. The reason for this is, if you haven't noticed, when you promote a unit in FE7, their max HP increases, but their current HP does not. And it does not increase in the max HP unless you save the game after your promotion and restart the chapter. So we want Canas to start out full HP because he needs that in order to sustain an attack later on. But Fiora, we don't want to be at max HP on turn 1 because that gives Canas a chance to immediately heal. And it's pretty uncommon to have a healing target available on turn 1, but this is one of the ways to do so, and we take every healing opportunity that we can get.
One of the reasons this chapter is so quick is Ninian, who demonstrates both of the capabilities that dancers have that are so good for low turn counting maps. One of these things is extending people's movement range. That's pretty obvious. The other one is allowing a unit to both pick up another unit and dropping them on the same turn. And that allows us to get a bunch of extra squares, and that lets us put Marcus in 2 range of the boss, Oleg. In a gross playthrough, that actually lets you 1-turn this chapter if you're able to double Oleg and effectively 4-hit KO him. We cannot do this because Marcus only has 11 speed, whereas Oleg has 8. So we have no way to 1-turn this chapter, and we're forced to do a 2-turn instead. Now, because we have to do that, Marcus has to survive this enemy phase after Oleg moves. We set him up for that by having him use a 1-use javelin, and that gives him increased crit against Oleg, but after he drops it, he's able to switch to a hand axe, and that lets him have weapon triangle advantage over the enemy flyers that come in, which is necessary because, as you can see, Marcus ends up at fairly low HP and poisoned.
If you were looking at Marcus's performance in this chapter against generic enemies, you would think, wow, he has really fallen off, because he's not doubling the wyvern riders, which are known to be not that fast of an enemy type, and he's not even doubling the Pegasus Knights, which up until this point have been extremely wimpy and sometimes featuring 0 attack speed. So what gives? And this is not Marcus's fault, it's because of the enemies in this chapter all having poison weapons, which is kind of a gimmick here. Poison weapons are known to be pretty weak in their individual damage dealing capabilities, but they're also super light, which means that the Pegasus Knights aren't weighed down, and this could potentially create a problem where both Marcus and Fiora are hemmed in, but fortunately we managed to avoid that with the setup that we have. Now, by being forced to 2-turn this chapter, we get to do all the side objectives and utilize all of the other units that we deployed in this chapter instead of them just doing whatever. The first thing that we get is the Elysian Whip in the top right corner of the map. That's a pretty important item that ends up getting skipped in a gross playthrough. We also get the Worm Slayer, which is much less important, and truthfully, if I were to optimize this chapter even further, I would skip the Worm Slayer and deploy Priscilla instead of Florina, because Priscilla would be able to heal Marcus at the start of this turn before he has to attack Oleg again. He has to dodge a steel bow attack over the course of 2 rounds of combat in order to not get killed. And finally, Lowen makes a shopping trip at a very important vendor. This is the only vendor until the end of the game that sells pure waters in bulk, and we take this chance to buy 8 of them. Pure waters, as we said earlier, very strong in FE7 with all the magic flying around, and in a gross LTC you're actually forced to skip this purchase, which just makes that sort of run overall less reliable. So Raven steps in for the kill, and that's chapter 21 finished in 2 turns. We'll see you next time.
See ya.